The child ran into traffic without thinking. That was the first thing that mattered. Emma Harrington, 8 years old, small for her age in a pink jacket with one torn seam down the shoulder, bolted into Boylston Street screaming. Not words. Just sound. The kind of sound that comes from deep inside a body when the world becomes too much, when the walls close in, when panic takes the shape of a living thing clawing at your lungs. Nora Sinclair didn't think. Her body simply moved. She was 28 years old but looked 40. Her dark hair hung in a tired braid down her back, wisps escaping around a face that had forgotten what rest looked like. Her eyes were grey, not the soft grey of winter sky, but the hard grey of asphalt after rain. She wore the same black uniform she'd worn since 6 in the morning, a maid's dress, practical and worn, with the Harrington family crest embroidered on the chest in fading gold thread. Her hands were calloused and red from the chemical burn of cleaning supplies, and her knees were permanently bruised from hours spent scrubbing marble floors on her hands and crawling through corners no one else would touch. But when Emma ran, Nora ran faster. The street was chaos. A Tuesday afternoon in Boston, October cold cutting through the humid air like a blade. Yellow taxis honking. Pedestrians shouting. The smell of exhaust mixing with wet concrete. And then the roar of an engine, loud, sudden, impossibly close. Nora's body was already moving. She was already reaching. The black sedan came from nowhere. From everywhere. Its brakes screamed like an animal in agony. The driver, a man whose face she could not yet see, tried to swerve, tried to avoid the small figure in the pink jacket frozen in the middle of the road. Nora hit Emma full force. Not gently. With her whole body, with all the strength her small frame contained, she wrapped her arms around the child and pulled backward with a desperate violence born of love that had no other language. Her knee struck the asphalt. Pain exploded through her kneecaps. Blood began to weep through her black tights. Emma's weight landed against her chest, and for one shattered second, they were airborne together, suspended in the space between pavement and sky. The sedan's impact came not with Emma, but with the storefront behind them. Glass exploded. The entire window of Francesca's bakery, a shop that had been there for 62 years, owned by the same Italian family through 3 generations, shattered into 10,000 pieces. The noise was apocalyptic. Like a building collapsing. Like the end of something. Glass rained down on Nora's back, cutting through her uniform, drawing thin lines of blood across her shoulder blades. She didn't feel it. She was too busy shielding Emma. Too busy checking the child's body for injuries. Too busy confirming with her hands and eyes that this small human was still whole. The sedan was wrapped around the storefront frame like a twisted toy. Steam rose from the hood. The driver's side door was crushed inward. Inside the vehicle, she could see a man in the front seat. He was slumped against the steering wheel. Blood ran from a cut on his temple, dark and thick, streaking down the side of his face. His eyes opened. They were dark. Not brown, truly dark, like the space before stars appear, like the depth of ocean water far below the surface where light cannot reach. And those eyes, calculated, conscious, burning despite the impact, locked directly onto hers. Giovanni Castelliano was 47 years old. 6'2". Built like someone who had survived things, who had been broken and welded back together stronger. His hair was black with silver at the temples, slicked back from a face that was brutally handsome in a way that belonged in a different era. His suit had cost more than everything Nora owned. The fabric was Italian wool, the weave so fine it looked like it had been spun from shadows. His dress shirt was white silk. His tie was burgundy, tied with the precision of a man who had learned early that appearance was armor. But right now he was bleeding. Right now he was trapped in a car with the metal crushed around him like a fist. Right now he was helpless. And the woman on her knees protecting a child, the woman whose knees were bleeding, whose uniform was torn, whose hair had come loose from its braid, she didn't know who he was. She didn't know that this man controlled half of Boston's underworld. That he had built an empire from nothing. That men trembled at the mention of his name. That he had never, in his entire life, shown vulnerability to another human being. But she was showing it now. And he was watching her do it. 2 men in dark suits exploded from a second vehicle parked 15 yards back. They were large men. The kind of men who had been chosen for specific qualities: loyalty, brutality, and ability to appear calm in the presence of chaos. They moved toward the sedan with practiced urgency, speaking into concealed microphones, their voices tight and controlled. "Boss is conscious. We've got the scene. Medical is en route. Clear the street. I don't want anyone near this. Confirm visual on civilians. Woman and child. Non-threatening." Nora didn't hear most of this. She was focused entirely on Emma. She was checking the child's wrists, her ankles, the back of her head for blood. Emma's skin was white. Her breathing was fast, shallow, the kind of breathing that comes after terror. Her eyes were locked on Nora's face like Nora was the only real thing left in the world. "We're okay," Nora whispered. "We're okay, baby. We're okay." She was lying. Nothing was okay. But Emma believed her anyway. The sound of sirens rose in the distance. Getting closer. The red and blue lights hadn't appeared yet, but they would soon. Around them, the street was filling with people, pedestrians frozen in shock, shop owners emerging from their stores, workers pulling out their phones to record. The scene was becoming a spectacle. The bakery's owner stood in the doorway of his destroyed shop, his hands pressed against his face. A woman in business clothes stood nearby, tears streaming down her cheeks. An old man with a cane sat down directly on the sidewalk, his legs no longer able to hold him. And in the center of it all, Nora remained on her knees, still holding Emma, still checking her for injuries she could not find, still whispering reassurances she did not entirely believe. She rose carefully. Emma's small hand gripped her neck. Nora's legs were shaking. Her knees felt like they had been smashed from the inside. Blood was running down her shin in thin red lines. She could smell her own fear mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp chemical burn of the airbag that had deployed inside the sedan. The man in the crushed car, Giovanni Castelliano, watched her stand. He watched her move away from the immediate scene, toward the edge of the chaos, away from the growing crowd. She was trying to shield Emma from the worst of it. From the sirens. From the police. From the sight of blood and destruction. He tried to move. The car groaned. Metal twisted. He gasped, sharp, animal, involuntary. His left arm wouldn't respond. His ribs screamed. Every breath felt like it was being filtered through broken glass. But he kept watching her. It was the last thing he saw before pain pulled him under. The paramedics arrived 3 minutes later. They moved Emma from Nora's arms with professional gentleness, checked her over, asked her questions. "Does anything hurt? Can you follow my finger with your eyes? What's your name?" Emma answered in whispers. She had been a student at the Harrington Academy, expensive, elite, the kind of school where children learn to play violin and speak French. But panic attacks didn't care about pedigree. They came for anyone. They didn't check a person's bank account before they took hold. The paramedics asked Nora where she worked. She told them. They asked for her phone number. She gave it, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold Emma's hand as they loaded her into the ambulance. One of the paramedics looked at Nora's bleeding knees. "You need to come to the hospital too. Get those cleaned out. Could be asphalt embedded in the wounds." Nora shook her head. "I'm fine. I just need to stay with Emma." She was not fine. She was terrified. What she didn't know was that the man bleeding in that crushed car had already made a decision. That he had already filed a mental note, the shape of her face, the grey of her eyes, the specific way she had thrown herself in front of a child who didn't belong to her. That he never forgot a face. That he never forgot a debt. That in exactly 24 hours, her entire life would be interrupted by 15 men in dark suits pulling up to the Harrington mansion gates. But for now, as the sirens wailed and the ambulance pulled away, Nora was simply a woman who had saved a child. She was covered in blood that wasn't hers. She was shaking with adrenaline. She was thinking about how she was going to explain the torn uniform to Margaret Harrington, the woman who employed her, who paid her minimum wage to live in a converted closet on the 4th floor of a mansion that had 17 bedrooms. She didn't know yet. She didn't know anything except that she had a child's hand in hers, and that was enough. Now let us go back. Let us understand how a woman with $78 to her name came to be in Boston at all. The converted closet that served as Nora Sinclair's bedroom measured 6 feet by 8 feet, and on this particular November night at 11:47 in the evening, it felt smaller than usual. The twin mattress on the floor took up most of the space. A duffel bag containing everything she owned sat in the corner, unzipped, clothes spilling out like the contents of a life that could not be contained. The single window looked out onto the service entrance of the Harrington mansion, where delivery trucks rumbled past at irregular intervals, their headlights briefly illuminating the water-stained walls. Nora sat on the mattress with her back against the wall. She was still wearing her work clothes, black pants with a rip at the knee from last Tuesday, a white button-down shirt with a coffee stain near the collar that Margaret Harrington had noticed that morning but said nothing about, which was somehow worse than criticism. Her phone's flashlight cast a pale glow across her hands as she counted the money spread out on the mattress in front of her. Crumpled bills. Loose change sorted into piles. She moved each bill slowly, as if speed might somehow multiply them. $78. That was all she had left in the world. She opened her banking app and stared at the screen. $78. The digits seemed to shrink as she looked at them, becoming smaller and less real, as if they might dissolve entirely if she blinked. Below that, a notification banner glowed red. Foreclosure notice for 847 Maple Street. Due in 19 days. $22,000. The house had belonged to her mother. Nora had grown up in that house, had painted her bedroom walls pale yellow when she was 12 years old, had danced in the kitchen while her mother hummed along to old jazz records. Her mother had died 3 years ago. Nora had not been able to afford the funeral, so a hospice nurse had helped her file the paperwork for a state burial. The house still carried her mother's name on the deed, and the bank that held the mortgage did not care that Nora's mother was dead. They cared only that rent had not been paid in 11 months. 19 days. She opened the calculator app and began typing. Rent for the converted closet took $400 a week. Margaret Harrington paid her minimum wage, $7.25 an hour for 14-hour days, which meant $314 a week before taxes, which meant roughly $270 a week after the government took its portion. She did not have rent. She would not have rent by the time it was due next Friday. Emma needed winter boots. The child's feet had grown 3 sizes since last year, and the old boots no longer fit. Nora had been rationing the money for weeks, trying to set aside enough for at least 1 pair before the cold really came. The math never worked. It had never worked. It would never work. She deleted the calculator app and opened her photos instead. A single image, her late husband, Marcus, standing in a garden somewhere, smiling. He wore a blue shirt that had been her favorite on him. His hair was still dark then, before the cancer started stealing it in white patches. She had taken this photo on their last good day, the day before the diagnosis, when they had believed they had decades left. She looked at it every night. Not because it comforted her, but because looking at it reminded her that some people got to keep the things they loved. A knock on the door. Nora startled so hard that the cash scattered across the mattress. Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas, small and pale, her 8-year-old frame barely visible in the darkness of the hallway. The child held a stuffed rabbit that had 1 ear missing. "I had a nightmare," Emma whispered. Nora scooped the money back into a pile, shoving it into a mason jar she kept hidden behind the mattress. "Come here, sweetheart." Emma padded across the small room and crawled into Nora's lap. The child weighed almost nothing. Nora had learned the exact pressure needed to hold her, enough to make the child feel safe, not enough to restrict her breathing. They sat together in the dark, Nora's phone still on the mattress, the foreclosure notice glowing silently. "Why were you sad?" Emma asked. "I wasn't sad, baby. Just thinking." "About what?" Nora closed her eyes. "About how much I love you." Emma's small hand found Nora's in the darkness. "I love you too. More than anyone." After Emma fell asleep against her shoulder, Nora sat motionless for nearly an hour. She did not move. She did not adjust her position even though her arm was falling asleep. She simply held the child and thought about the mathematics of survival. Morning came pale and cold through that single small window. Nora had not slept. She moved through the house at 5 in the morning, before anyone else woke, preparing Emma's breakfast, oatmeal stretched with extra water to make it go further, topped with a handful of berries she had bought 3 days ago and rationed carefully. She braided Emma's hair into 2 neat plaits while the child ate. The Harrington house was beginning to wake. Footsteps in hallways. A shower running on the 2nd floor. By 6:30, Nora was in the kitchen when Margaret Harrington appeared, already dressed for the day in a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Nora's wages. The woman did not acknowledge her directly. Margaret walked past as if Nora were a piece of furniture, something fixed to the room, incapable of feeling anything. "The guest bathroom needs scrubbing," Margaret said without turning around. "Emma tracked mud again yesterday. And do something about your hair. You look homeless." Nora swallowed the response that wanted to come out. Her hands steadied themselves. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. I'll take care of it right now." Margaret's husband sat at the kitchen table reading the Wall Street Journal. He did not glance up. The newspaper crackled as he turned a page. Outside, through the kitchen window, Nora could see the long driveway that led to the gates, the very gates where, in exactly 18 hours, 15 men in dark suits would arrive in a black convoy. But she did not know that yet. She climbed the narrow back stairs to the guest bathroom and began filling the tub with cleaning supplies. The work was mindless, which meant her thoughts could wander. The foreclosure notice. The winter boots Emma needed. The $78 in the mason jar. The nightmare her daughter had experienced, though Emma was not her daughter, not legally, not according to any document. Emma belonged to Margaret and Robert Harrington. Emma belonged to inheritance plans and private schools and a future that did not include the woman who loved her most. At noon, Nora took Emma to the park. They went to the same park every day, to the same bench beneath the oak tree. Emma played on the grass, chasing pigeons with the kind of wild joy that only children possessed. Nora watched from the bench and tried not to think about how much longer she could afford to give the child these moments. That was when the man appeared. He stood at the edge of the playground wearing a brown leather jacket, his hands in his pockets. He had the build of someone who had worked construction, broad shoulders and thick arms. His face was rough in a way that suggested a hard life. He stood very still, watching Emma. Emma saw him. The child's body went rigid. Not from fear exactly, but from recognition. Her face went pale. The pigeons forgotten. Nora stood instantly, her body moving without conscious thought, putting herself between the man and the child. The man's expression changed. He looked away. He turned and walked back toward the parking area, and Nora never saw him again. But Emma began to scream. The sound that came from the child's mouth was not words. It was animal panic, the sound of something trapped. Emma collapsed to the grass, hyperventilating, her small fists clenched. Nora held her, whispering words that did not seem to reach the child. "You are safe. You are safe. I have you." It took 15 minutes for Emma's breathing to slow. Nora carried the child to the car and drove without thinking about where she was going, only knowing that they needed to leave. They ended up at the intersection on Walnut Street, where the traffic light had just turned green, where a woman in a sedan was accelerating through a yellow light that she believed she had time to cross. Nora did not remember the decision to unbuckle her seatbelt. did not remember moving. One moment she was sitting in the car with Emma beside her, and the next moment she was lunging across the seat and pulling the child toward her, away from the passenger window, away from the path of the black sedan that was entering the intersection at high speed. The collision happened in increments. The initial impact, the sound of metal screaming, the sensation of being thrown sideways. The window beside Emma's face exploded into diamonds of glass. The car rolled half an inch to the right. The smell of hot rubber and gasoline. The silence that came after, heavy and absolute. Emma was screaming, but Nora could not hear her. Could only feel the child's body shaking against her own. She lay on top of Emma, pressing the child into the seat, her own body a shield. Blood dripped from her forehead onto the child's face, but she did not know where the blood had come from. Did not care. A man's voice called out from the street. Then another. Car doors opened. Someone was running toward them. The world fractured into chaos and movement and sirens in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. Through the broken window, Nora saw the sedan that had hit them. The driver's side was crushed. The man inside was slumped against the steering wheel, blood running from his temple. His eyes were closed. She thought he was dead until she saw his chest move, a shallow rise and fall. He opened his eyes. His gaze found hers across the impossible distance between their cars. Dark eyes. Intelligent eyes. Eyes that burned with the kind of intensity that only came from a life lived entirely outside the law. Giovanni Castellano looked at the woman who was shielding a stranger's child, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition. Not of her face, but of her choice. Of the fact that she had thrown herself in front of a child who was not hers, had risked everything without hesitation, had done exactly what he had spent his entire life trying to do, protect someone who could not protect herself. The sirens grew louder. She did not move. She remained on top of Emma, her own blood mixing with the glass fragments, her body steady. She did not know that this moment had just purchased her future. Did not know that Giovanni Castellano was already cataloguing her face, her grey eyes, the specific angle of her jaw. Did not know that in exactly 24 hours, 15 men in dark suits would arrive at the gates of the Harrington mansion. Did not know that everything was about to change. A paramedic opened the broken window. "Can you move? Is the child hurt?" Nora did not respond. She was looking at the crushed sedan, at the man who was bleeding slowly onto expensive leather upholstery. One of his men, tall, with a scar across his jaw, was already on his phone. "Sir is conscious. Multiple injuries. Sending location now." Another vehicle pulled up. A black SUV, and then another. Men in dark suits emerged, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested military training. They did not look like ordinary security. They looked like something else entirely, something dangerous that wore the mask of professionalism. The paramedic gently pulled Nora away from Emma. "You need medical attention too. Come with me." Nora moved numbly. She climbed out of the car on trembling legs. Her knees were scraped raw, bleeding into her black work pants. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold Emma as they guided her toward the ambulance. One of the paramedics looked at her bleeding knees. "You need to come to the hospital too. Get those cleaned out. Could be asphalt embedded in the wounds." Nora shook her head. "I'm fine. I just need to stay with Emma." She was not fine. She was terrified. Not of the accident. Not of the paramedics or the police who were already beginning to arrive. Terrified of something she did not yet understand. Terrified of the way that tall man with the scar had looked at her. Terrified of the feeling that her life, in this single moment, had been marked by something larger and more dangerous than anything she had known before. What she did not know was that the man in the crushed sedan had already made a decision. That he had already burned her face into his memory. That he never forgot a debt. that in exactly 24 hours, 15 men in dark suits would pull up to the Harrington mansion gates, and the small, invisible woman who lived in the converted closet would suddenly become the most important person in Boston. But for now, as the sirens wailed and the ambulance pulled away, Nora was simply holding Emma's hand. The child's fingers were small and cold. "I'm here," Nora whispered. "I'm here. You are safe." Emma did not respond. The child was looking back at the crashed site, at the black SUVs, at the men in suits who were lifting something into another vehicle. Emma's eyes were wide and dark and knowing in a way that no 8-year-old should have to know anything. "VV," Emma whispered, using the nickname she had given Nora years ago. "Are we going to be okay?" Nora did not answer. She simply held the child tighter and prayed to a god she had stopped believing in. The restaurant booth smelled of garlic and wine and something else, money, perhaps, the kind that soaked into leather and marble and the spaces between words. Nora sat rigid across from Giovanni Castelliano, her hands folded on the white tablecloth as if holding them still might prevent her from shattering completely. Giovanni poured water into her glass, not wine. He had noticed her hesitation at the waiter's first approach, the way her eyes had flickered to the prices on the menu before looking away. He saw everything about her, the worn jacket, the calloused fingers, the exhaustion that lived in the corners of her eyes like a permanent resident. "Tell me about Emma," he said quietly. "The child you saved." Nora's face transformed. It was instantaneous, like a door opening onto warmth. "She is 8 years old. Brilliant beyond measure. She reads books meant for children twice her age and writes stories about worlds where people actually listen to each other." Her voice softened further. "But she is terrified of her own shadow because her parents barely notice she exists. They are too busy with their galas and their clubs and their social standings." "Panic attacks," Giovanni said. It was not a question. "Severe ones. Her whole body goes rigid. Her breathing stops. But I know how to pull her back. I sing to her. I hold her hand. I tell her that the feeling will pass, and I stay until it does." Nora's hands unclenched slightly. "I am the only one who sees her? Really sees her?" Giovanni nodded slowly, and something flickered across his face, recognition of a kind that made Sergio and Franco, standing motionless by the kitchen door, exchange a look neither had shared in 15 years of working for this man. They had seen him with frightened people. With desperate people. With people begging for mercy or threatening retaliation. But they had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at her now, like she was a puzzle that had finally begun to make sense. "How long have you worked for the Harringtons?" Giovanni asked. "For years. 14-hour days, 6 days a week." Nora's jaw tightened. "I sleep in a converted closet on the 3rd floor. It is approximately 7 feet by 6 feet. When I lie in bed, I can touch both walls if I stretch my arms out." Giovanni's expression did not change, but Franco saw his shoulders tense beneath the immaculate suit. "I pour everything I have into a child who is not mine," Nora continued, "because no one else will. Her mother, Margaret, she refers to Emma as the burden from my first marriage. Those are her exact words. Emma is 8 years old and she has heard her mother call her a burden more times than she has heard her mother say hello." She stopped. Her voice had risen slightly, and she forced it back down. "But I would do it again. Every second of it. She deserves someone who sees her. Someone who loves her for exactly who she is." Giovanni leaned forward, and the candlelight caught the scar that ran from the corner of his eye toward his cheekbone, a thin white line that spoke of violence survived. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "Knowing how little you have. Knowing there are easier jobs, easier lives available to you." Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was brittle, like glass fracturing under pressure. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and turned the screen toward him. The banking app glowed against her face. $78. That was the entire number. "This is what I have to my name," she whispered. "And this?" She swiped to the next screen. A notification from her bank. A foreclosure notice on her mother's house. $22,000 owed. 19 days remaining until the county sold it at auction. Giovanni's jaw tightened. She saw it happen, the subtle shift of muscle, the way his hand clenched briefly before releasing. My mother raised me in that house, Nora continued, her voice cracking slightly. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. It took everything we had to pay for treatment, $137,000 in medical bills, and she died anyway. My late husband, he proposed on the porch of that house. In the spring. When the magnolias were blooming. She pulled a worn photograph from her jacket pocket, edges soft from handling. A young man with kind eyes and a shy smile, standing on a porch with his arm around a younger version of herself. He died in a car accident 6 months after we married. The house is all I have left of either of them. She put the photo away carefully, like it might dissolve if she was not gentle enough. I count crumpled bills by lamplight and the math never works, she said flatly. $78 cannot become $22,000. It simply cannot. By March, the house will belong to a bank, and I will have lost the last physical place where I was ever loved. Giovanni was very still. The restaurant hummed around them, the soft clink of glasses, the murmur of other diners, the sound of the kitchen operating behind closed doors. But at this table, there was only silence. "Why would you help me?" Nora asked suddenly, her eyes meeting his. "I am nobody. I live in a closet. I eat the leftovers the Harringtons throw away. I am invisible to everyone except Emma. Why would a man like you even notice someone like me?" Giovanni's voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath. "I grew up in a one-room apartment in Southie with a father who used his fists more than his words. I was 8 years old, Emma's age, the first time I went to school with bruises I had to lie about. I clawed my way out of poverty and violence. I swore that no child would suffer the way I did." He paused. "Yesterday, I was bleeding in a crushed car. My security had scattered. I was helpless, and I was going to die. And you shielded a child with your own body. You chose her over yourself. You chose her when you had nothing left to give." Nora's eyes filled with tears. They spilled over without sound, running down her cheeks. "That is not nobody," Giovanni said quietly. "That is everything." Sergio stepped forward and whispered something to Giovanni, who nodded slightly. The older man's phone buzzed on the table, a message received and read in the space of 3 seconds. His expression remained unchanged, but something shifted behind his eyes. Nora's phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. She ignored it at first, but it vibrated again. And again. 3 times in rapid succession. "Excuse me," she murmured, pulling the phone out. A text message. "From an unknown number, I know you're at the Harringtons. Come home and we'll talk. Or I'll come get you." Then another, "Don't make me come find you." Then another, "Vivian told me you're at some restaurant. Stop being difficult." The color drained from her face. The phone nearly slipped from her fingers. Giovanni saw. His hand moved across the table and covered hers, not grasping, but steady, anchoring. "Who is that?" "I need to go." Nora tried to pull her hand away, but she did not pull hard. "Tell me who frightens you," Giovanni said, and it was not a request. The story came out in fragments. Douglas Hale. 34 years old. A man she had dated for 3 months before the softness in his voice turned sharp. Before he pushed her into walls. Before he broke her ribs on a Tuesday night and told her not to go to the hospital because the doctors would ask questions and he would lose his job. Before he appeared at her workplace and whispered what he would do if she ever told anyone. Before he cornered her in a grocery store aisle and described, in detail, how he would find her no matter where she ran. She had filed a police report. 9 times. Officers Brennan and Martinez had laughed at her. Told her she was wasting their time. That a man like Douglas Hale, who knew people, who was connected, who understood how the system actually worked, was not going to prison over some hysterical woman's bruises. She had gotten a restraining order. He had violated it 14 times. She had documented every violation. The police had done nothing. He has friends on the force, she finished, her voice barely audible. I have nowhere to run that he cannot find. Giovanni's face had gone completely still. It was a different kind of stillness than his usual composure. This was the stillness before violence, before something irreversible shifted. Franco saw it and stepped closer. Sergio's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Giovanni pulled out his phone and made a call. When it connected, he did not wait for greeting. Vincent. I need a complete file on Douglas Hale. Everything. Where he lives, where he works, every phone number, every known associate, every financial record. Every violation of a restraining order filed by Nora Sinclair. He paused. I do not care if it is midnight or 3 in the morning. I want it within 2 hours. He hung up. Then he looked at Nora with an expression that should have frightened her but somehow did not. You are going to listen to me very carefully. You are not going back to that apartment tonight. You are going to a safe house in Back Bay where Sergio's sister lives. You are going to stay there until this is resolved. Do you understand? 3 miles away, in Nora's apartment building, Douglas Hale was standing outside her locked door with a key he had never been given. He had paid a maintenance worker $40 to let him into the building. He had been standing in her apartment for 7 minutes, going through her drawers, smelling her pillowcase, looking at the sparse furniture and the empty refrigerator and feeling a rage that needed somewhere to go. He did not know that Giovanni Castellano had, at that exact moment, dispatched 4 men to watch every entrance of that building. He did not know that his phone was being traced. He did not know that within 6 hours, his bank accounts would be investigated, his employment would be terminated, and 2 federal agents would begin building a case that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He simply stood in the darkness of her apartment, breathing her air, waiting for a woman who would never come, while the machinery of his own destruction began turning in the background, patient and inexorable as winter. Back at the restaurant, Giovanni was still holding Nora's hand. You are safe now, he said. No one touches what belongs to me. And you, or he paused. You have already proven you belong to something bigger than fear. Nora did not pull away. Nora's apartment door was locked when she arrived at 10:17 p.m., but the moment she turned the key, she knew something was wrong. The air inside tasted different, stale, invaded, wrong. Dead leaves scattered across the threadbare carpet from an open window she had not opened. The radiator hissed its familiar complaint, but underneath it, underneath everything, was the sound of breathing that was not her own. Douglas Hale sat on her couch in the darkness. Her blood turned to ice. He was 6 feet tall, broader than her, the spider tattoo crawling up his neck visible even in the shadows cast by the streetlight outside. His eyes were empty, the kind of empty that preceded violence. He stood slowly, deliberately, like a predator unfolding from rest. Hello, Nora, he said. His voice carried the weight of months of obsession, of restraining orders ignored, of calls made at 3 in the morning. I have been waiting for you. Nora's hand moved toward her phone. Douglas was faster. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped her wrist, his fingers pressing into bone. She gasped. The pressure was immediate, suffocating, familiar in the worst way. The cops will not come, he said quietly. Brennan and Martinez are working tonight. They will not come even if you scream. Nora's vision tunneled. She was back in the hospital with broken ribs. Back in the grocery store where he had whispered threats into her ear while other shoppers pretended not to see. Back in the darkness of her own terror. Her free hand closed around the card in her jacket pocket. Giovanni's card. She pressed her thumb against her phone, already in her grip. Once. Twice. The call connected on the second press. Douglas heard it. His face twisted. He ripped the phone from her hand and threw it across the room, where it crashed against the wall and fell silent. But the call had connected. Giovanni Castelliano was in his office above the restaurant when Nora's number lit up his phone. He heard the crash. He heard her gasp of pain. He heard Douglas's voice, low and vicious, saying words that made something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. "Hang up or I will make sure she cannot walk tomorrow," Douglas said. Giovanni did not hang up. He set the phone down gently and looked at Sergio, who had been reviewing ledgers across the desk. Their eyes met. No words were necessary. "Move," Giovanni said. "Now." 12 men mobilized in 90 seconds. Car started. Engines roared. The machinery of retribution, patient and precise as a blade, began to turn. Black SUVs surrounded Nora's building at 10:34 p.m. There were no sirens, no shouting, no announcement. Giovanni's men moved like ghosts through the stairwells, silent, economical, efficient. They were up 3 flights and at her apartment door before Douglas even registered the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Sergio and Franco entered first, broad-shouldered and expressionless. 8 more men followed, filling the small apartment until there was no space left that was not occupied by the machinery of consequence. Douglas spun. His grip on Nora's arm loosened in shock. "You cannot, I will call the cops." Sergio smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Please do. We have been recording you for the last 4 minutes. Breaking and entering. Assault. Violation of a restraining order. Your cop friends cannot help you now." Giovanni entered last. He saw Nora backed against the wall, bruises already flowering on her wrist like dark flowers blooming in fast motion. He saw her face streaked with tears. He saw the terror in her eyes and something shifted in him, something ancient and protective and dangerous. Then he looked at Douglas Hale. Douglas's bluster crumbled the moment their eyes met. He tried anyway. "You do not know who you are messing with." "I know exactly who you are," Giovanni said. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying. "A coward who hits women and hides behind corrupt cops. But what you do not know is that I have spent the last 6 hours building a federal case against you. Assault. Stalking. Witness intimidation. And your friends Officers Brennan and Martinez." Giovanni paused. "They are about to have a very bad morning." Douglas's face crumbled like paper in water. "Wait, we can talk about this." "Too late," Giovanni said. He nodded to Franco. At 6:19 a.m. on a grey October morning, FBI agents and federal marshals surrounded Douglas Hale's apartment in Dorchester. Tactical teams in body armor, weapons drawn, warrant signed and federal. They breached the door at precisely the moment his alarm was supposed to wake him. Douglas was dragged out in handcuffs and boxers, shaking like a cornered animal, his face on every news camera in the city. The anchor's voice cut through the morning. Douglas Hale, arrested on federal charges of assault, stalking, and conspiracy. If convicted, he faces up to 40 years in federal prison. 40 years. The number hung in the air like a life sentence spoken in a single breath. Officers Brennan and Martinez were arrested an hour later. Internal Affairs had recordings, bribes, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Their careers obliterated before breakfast. Their badges stripped before lunch. Their futures erased before the news cycle moved on to other stories. But Margaret Harrington's destruction was slower, more deliberate, more complete. Giovanni's investigation into Douglas had uncovered threads that led directly to the Harrington law firm. Margaret's husband had represented Douglas in a civil suit. Evidence had been buried. Witnesses had been paid off. For 3 years, the machinery of justice had been quietly obstructed by people who believed themselves untouchable. By noon, federal agents were at the mansion with subpoenas. Margaret stood in her foyer in her cream Chanel suit, her hair perfect, her face ashen as FBI agents boxed up files from her husband's study. News vans parked outside like vultures. Reporters shouted questions through the gates. Emma watched from an upstairs window, confused and small and afraid. Margaret's social standing evaporated like morning mist. Country club memberships revoked. Charity boards removed her name from letterhead. Her husband's law firm placed under federal investigation. The systematic destruction of everything she had built, not through violence, but through the exposure of truth. Not through death, but through public humiliation so complete that she would never recover from it. She was not going to prison. Prison would have been simpler. Instead, she was going to live in the same city where everyone knew exactly what she had done. She was going to see the disgust in people's eyes. She was going to feel the weight of consequence every single day for the rest of her life. Justice delivered, not death, but something more permanent. Something that would not let her forget. Nora watched the news from Giovanni's restaurant, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she did not drink. Sergio had brought her there after the apartment, after the police had taken her statement, after the federal agents had explained what would happen next. She saw Douglas led out in handcuffs, saw the federal charges scroll across the screen in white text, saw his face, terrified, destroyed, finished. 40 years, Sergio said quietly, standing beside her. Federal prison. No parole. No early release. He will be 74 years old if he survives it. Nora's hands trembled. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Is it really over? It is over, Sergio said. And he meant it. The phone rang in Giovanni's office. He answered it on the first ring, already knowing what the voice on the other end would say. The federal case was solid. The recording was admissible. Douglas Hale would spend the rest of his functional life in a cell, and there was nothing he could do about it. Giovanni hung up the phone and stood at his office window, looking out at the city below. Boston stretched out beneath the night sky, millions of people living millions of lives, and somewhere in that vast machinery, one woman had been saved. The machinery of consequence had been set in motion, and it had ground everything to dust. 1 week after Douglas Hale's arrest, Nora stood on the front steps of a small blue Cape Cod in Quincy with white shutters and a porch swing. The foreclosure notice was gone. The deed sat in a manila envelope in her hands, her name printed in official black ink across the front. Paid in full. The November cold bit at her skin, but the sun was weak and clear, breaking through clouds the color of slate. She pulled out the photograph she had kept in her wallet for 3 years. Giovanni's eyes remained fixed on the street ahead. And you? What will you do now? I have offers, Nora said. 3 families want a nanny. References from people I have never met. I assume you had something to do with that. A slight smile crossed his face, barely there. I may have made some calls. Nora turned to face him fully. Her voice was steady but her hands trembled. Why did you do all this? The truth, not the debt, not the obligation. Why? Giovanni was quiet for so long the silence became a presence between them. When he finally spoke, his voice came out like a confession, like something he had never said aloud before. Because when I was 8 years old and my father broke my arm, no one came. No teachers, no neighbors, no one. I survived by luck and by rage. I clawed my way out of poverty swearing that no child would suffer the way I did. But somewhere along the way, I became the kind of man who could watch people suffer and feel nothing. He paused. When I saw you shield Emma during that traffic, when I saw you choose her safety over your own terror, I saw something I had thought the world had destroyed in me. I saw proof that good people still exist. His dark eyes met hers. You saved my life that night when my security failed. But more than that, you reminded me why I clawed out of that hell. You gave me back something I thought was lost. You gave me hope that the world is not entirely rotten. Nora's eyes filled with tears. She did not wipe them away. You saved me too, she whispered. When I had nothing left. When Douglas came and the police turned away and I was alone in that apartment, you came. You saw me when I was invisible. Giovanni stood and offered his hand. When she took it, His grip was gentle but firm, as if he were afraid she might dissolve if he held too tight. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said. "Not as a debt. Not as gratitude for a life saved. As two people who have seen the worst of the world and are still standing." Nora rose beside him, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight lifting from her shoulders like fog burning away under sunlight. They drove through Boston as the sun fell lower, the city lights beginning to glow against the darkening sky. Giovanni's car moved through the streets with quiet purpose, black leather interior, the soft hum of an expensive engine. Nora watched the neighborhoods change from modest houses to elegant brownstones, from busy avenues to quiet side streets lined with restaurants that had no visible signs. Castellanos occupied a corner building with dark wood and candlelit windows. The interior was warm golden shadow, the kind of place where power was conducted in whispers and the staff moved like ghosts trained to anticipate need before it became visible. Giovanni led her to a private booth in the back, separated from the rest of the restaurant by a velvet curtain. Dead leaves pressed against the window outside, and the November wind rattled the glass with a sound like distant warning. Inside, everything was stillness and light. Nora wore a simple black dress, the first new thing she had bought herself in 2 years. The fabric was soft against her skin, expensive but not ostentatious. Giovanni watched her the way he might watch something rare and difficult to understand, as if trying to solve the mathematics of how she had survived at all. Wine glasses sat on the white tablecloth between them, untouched. Pasta cooled slowly on plates neither of them had touched. "Emma sent me a drawing," Nora said, breaking the quiet. "She drew our faces side by side with hearts between us. She asked her grandmother when I was coming to visit." "You will visit," Giovanni said. It was not a question. "I will visit," Nora agreed. "Margaret's lawyer has been calling. Apparently her husband's firm is collapsing. Partners are withdrawing. She is moving to some apartment in the suburbs. Her power is gone." "As it should be," Giovanni said. His voice held no cruelty, only fact. "And Douglas?" she asked, though she already knew. 3 weeks into a federal sentence. Maximum security facility in Pennsylvania. 40 years of concrete and fluorescent lights and men whose violence makes his look like a child's tantrum. He wrote a letter begging for mercy. It was denied. Nora felt something inside her settle. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps never. But the trembling that had lived in her chest for so long finally quieted. Giovanni reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm, his grip steady. She thought of that October afternoon when she had caught him bleeding and broken, when she had stayed because a child needed her, when she had no idea that in saving a Mafia boss, she was saving herself. "You asked me once why I would help you," Giovanni said. "Why I would care about someone I did not know. Here is the answer, because the world is full of people who take and people who destroy. But you are someone who gives even when you have nothing left to give. That is rare. That is worth protecting. That is worth everything." Nora's voice was steady when she spoke. "You protected me when no one else would. When my own family turned away, when the law looked the other way, when I was alone in that apartment and felt like I was dying. You saw me. You chose me. I chose you," Giovanni said quietly. "And I would choose you again." He lifted his wine glass. "To being seen." Nora lifted hers, the candlelight catching the rim and spilling gold across her fingers. "To being saved." They drank, and outside the window, the November wind rattled and howled, but inside the private booth, two people who had known only darkness had found unexpected light. The storm had passed. Not completely, never completely. But enough that they could breathe. Sometimes rescue comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you save is the person who saves you in return. Nora Sinclair learned that survival is not about having the most money or the most power. It is about having the courage to act when someone needs you, even when you have nothing left to give. And Giovanni Castellano learned that true strength is not just about building an empire of power and fear. It is about using that power to protect those who cannot protect themselves. What began with a child running into traffic and a car crash on a bitter October afternoon became a story of two broken people choosing each other when the world had tried to break them both. When everyone else looked away, they saw each other. When everyone else turned their backs, they turned toward each other. That is how the strongest bonds are forged, in the darkness, by people who have learned that love is not weakness but the greatest courage of all. If this story moved your heart, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that rescue can come from impossible places, that the invisible are seen. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we are bringing you another story that will leave you breathless. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever been saved by someone unexpected? Have you ever discovered that the person you helped became the person who helped you? The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think.